think something that's very pertinent to our lives today in all sorts of ways. And, you know, the title you see there, Whose Image Is This? Which, of course, refers to Jesus lifting up the Roman coin and saying, whose image is on this coin? You render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar and the things that are God's. And what we want to try and do this evening is think a little bit about how we deal with challenges both in public discourse and in private relationships. And by way of introduction, I just want to say a couple of things. When we disagree, or the question is, how do we respond to people when we disagree strongly with them, which often happens, or when they attack us, which sometimes happens, or they're openly hostile towards us because of whatever reason, or when we see people behaving badly towards other people, or indeed towards us. Now, we all know, especially in Washington, D.C., we all know the law of the jungle, the way of the world. It's pretty clear. We see it all around us, and we're all involved in it. If we disagree with someone about something important, at best, we might explain courteously why we disagree with them and present, whatever evidence and arguments we have to show why we think we're right and we think they're wrong. In healthy relationships, such discussions are good. Even if we still disagree at the end of them, at least we understand more of why the other person thinks the way they do because we've been listening to them. We've been listening to each other. Yet even these arguments or discussions can often be more about winning and losing than about the people making them. I don't know about you, but when I was young and at university, we used to have, it's a fencing match, isn't it? We used to enjoy, that was the national sport, was standing at the bar and arguing with people about trying to prove them wrong, prove us right, and it was all kind of to some extent, some kind of macho thing. But I think we did learn from each other, and you would never admit to being wrong, of course, but you would go away afterwards, and perhaps when you were on your own, you'd think, well, maybe they had a point about some of that. That doesn't seem to be happening so much today, I think. At worst, of course, we use ad hominem attacks, deriding people personally. You know the kind of thing, if you think that, then you must be stupid or evil or arrogant or all three. And if we're honest, there's part of us, we see other people doing that, but if we're honest, there's part of us that kind of engages in that kind of debate, that kind of argument as well. So you know the kind of thing. And I've heard even in the councils of the church, where a position is asserted, and at the very same time it's stated that anyone who disagrees with this position must be wicked, stupid, or unchristian. It happens. In our polarized society, this seems to be the default approach. No attempt to persuade by reason and argument, just rant and vitriol. And it's a road to nowhere in the end. And I think we see this perhaps a lot on our television sets at demonstrations or on university campuses these days. The latter being, of course, the last place one would expect to find it, really, or hope to find it, where people shout and scream to prevent others saying things they disagree with. Now, we may not do that, but how often do we close others down with a snide remark, or simply by saying nothing and turning away with a false smile, rather than explaining why we disagree with them? We don't say we think they're stupid, but our behavior clearly shows that we think they are. Secondly, if someone directly attacks us for whatever reason, how do we respond? Maybe they disapprove of what we say or how we act, or they just don't like who we are or where we come from, or they think we are in the way of what they want to happen. At best, again, we might politely respond with silence. At worst, we launch our own attack in like kind, and a kind of verbal war is declared. We also may not say much at all, but inwardly we write them off as an enemy and place them in a bracket in our minds reserved for those we seek to avoid and even warn others about. A kind of cold war that is never fully stated or articulated, but from which there is no coming back for them, at least not in our eyes. I remember my daughter Emily, when she was very little, she had a way of doing that. She would say, I'm going to put you in the bucket, which she meant the refuse bin. I'm going to throw you in the bucket. And that was it. You knew you were in trouble then. Well, I think the sad thing is, I think we do put people in the bucket, and they don't come back from that in our eyes, often anyway. Thirdly, if we see people behaving badly towards us, or indeed towards other people, we might speak out, or we might ignore it, depending on the situation and how courageous we're feeling at the time. The law of the jungle puts self-preservation above everything else. And so the temptation to say nothing, if saying nothing is less likely to cause us risk or discomfort, is very strong. On the other hand, we can also enjoy that feeling of moral superiority when we call out what we think is bad behavior because it makes us feel good and righteous. It depends, of course, on the behavior, but we have all known times when people raise up minor behavior and make it into a moral crusade. I remember my mother, who was a completely unrepentant smoker all her life, and even when she got cancer, her great claim was that it wasn't in her lungs, so it clearly wasn't the smoking that caused it. But I remember she was invited to a dinner party where at the end of the dinner party, the hostess said, we're now going to have coffee. If anyone would like to smoke, there's the garden, right? Which, of course, in coming from a wartime generation, deeply offended my mother. Anyway, she bided her time and invited that same couple back a few months later. And at the end of that dinner party, my mother said, we're all going to smoke. If you don't want to smoke, please feel free to go out into the garden. And there's a kind of justice in that, I think. Anyway, so the question is really for this evening, I think, is how do we deal with these really common things? Here we go. That's a strange. There we go. So what I want to do just initially is in your tables, just for each of you, if you've got time, just to give an example of someone you've seen deal with a serious disagreement, not trivial, serious disagreement, or a personal attack, or bad behavior, well. Can you remember a time when you've seen someone deal with that in a way you think that was a good way of dealing with that? And also, to give an example of someone you've seen deal with one of those situations badly. What does that look like? Okay? So you've got 10 minutes to do that, and try and go around everyone and get an example from each person, if you can. Ron and Anita, it might be better, actually, if you don't mind splitting up, if one of you goes to that table, one of you goes to that table. Otherwise, you're going to have a very private conversation. Okay, so 10 minutes. We're running a little behind already, but... All right, everyone? Some good conversations there, I think. Now this has died, I don't know why. So it would be nice to have a little bit of feedback from the tables, but we're running a bit short of time. So Oh, thank you. So what I want you to do now is to, we've got 3 tables, that's perfect. I'm going to give you 2 passages from Scripture where Jesus encounters people who are actually generally trying to get at him. It's generally an attack on him, not always, but it's generally an attack on him. But how he deals with people who are either wrong-headed, or they're after him, or they're just behaving badly. And thank you. So I think you've got some Bibles on your tables. Maybe if this table over here on my right, Isabel and Christy's table, if you look at the first 2, Matthew 22:15-22, and John 8:3-11, which is of course the render unto Caesar, the things that are Caesar, and the woman taken in adultery, and just look at the way Jesus deals with those situations. We're not so much interested in, what other people are thinking and doing so much, but just to see how Jesus deals with that. In the first instance, it's very much people who are attacking him, render unto Caesar. And then the woman taken in adultery is more really, if you think about how that conversation, or how, again, it's really them attacking him because they're asking him the question. They're trying to get him to pronounce on the situation. But just see how he deals with that. And then perhaps over here with Will's table, if you look at Matthew 27:11-14 and Matthew 26:62-68, of course, the 27 is Pilate, Jesus' encounter with Pilate, and how Jesus responds to Pilate and his questions. And then the second one, which is 26, which is before it actually, but is Jesus and the high priest. And you'll see in both cases, Jesus is standing before an authority that is very much opposed to him. And just look at how he deals with those 2 situations. And lastly, down here, if you would look at John 2:13-16 and John 4:17-30, which is a long passage, but it's such a familiar story, I'm sure you will know it. It's the woman at the well and the conversation that Jesus has with her. And in the first one, it's just really, it's less of a conversation and just what Jesus does, the cleansing of the temple. So just have a look at those 2 incidents and just sort of see how does Jesus deal with those situations. And I'll give you, really there's 3 questions which I want you to answer. 1, how does Jesus deal with personal attack, wrong thinking, and bad behavior? The second question is there anything in common in his words and behavior in these very different incidents? So look at the 2 incidents you've got and see if there's anything in common in Jesus' response. And finally, and don't forget to do this because this is important, I think, how can we apply his approach in our public discourse and private relationships? So, if you do recognize something in Jesus' behavior that makes sense and is good, then think how could that affect the way I behave in public discourse and private relationships. So you've got 15 minutes, and then I promise to hand over to Tiffany and Anita, who are going to have a conversation. Sorry. Okay, everyone. I know we haven't had an awful lot of time to look at those passages. I think we need to, just to be respectful of people's time, I think we'll need to save any feedback from those discussions to the end. But Tiffany is now going to interview Anita, who is a clinical psychologist, correct?
And psychologist and author.
Psychologist and author. Anita's read some wonderful books. I've read one of them, and they're really, really experiential. They're from her own experience, and they're also really powerful. And Anita works every day. She was saying to me she sees 40 people a week. So dealing with people's brokenness, their difficulties, their behavior towards you, I guess, and to other people, is kind of what you do. So we thought it would be great just for Tiffany to interview Anita for a few minutes and just ask her some of those questions.
Could you hand her your...
Yes.
Thank you. And part of the reason we thought of asking Anita is also because Anita, one of her subspecialties is relationship therapy. So getting into these interpersonal dynamics of...
Thank you.
Two individuals.
Want to sit down?
Yeah, why don't we sit?
You sit there.
Okay.
Helping two individuals as they kind of get caught in some of these things. So I'll just, I have a few questions I'm going to ask Anita, and when we're finished, or even as we're talking, you're welcome to chime in and ask a question of your own, so keep in mind what you would want to know. Anita, what are some of the feelings that arise within a person when faced with disagreement or potential conflict? Could you kind of describe the internal happenings?
Yes, it depends on the situation, the particular emotional state of the person at that particular time. But there are several possibilities, such as agreement, offense, hatred, curiosity, or a feeling of betrayal.
Can you tell me more about betrayal?
And this is growing in our culture now. There's a tremendous us and them mentality. And so we see this in families, in couples. There are many couples where partners have different political views and so forth. We see it among friends who've known each other for lifetimes and decades. But then when they get into certain subjects, it can end the friendship. And the sense of betrayal is because rather than seeing what the person said as an opinion, there's a judgment made about the person being good or bad, and you're not who I thought you were. Therefore, I feel betrayed because I thought we were the same, or I thought we were alike. And I'm just so wrong about what I thought you were that I feel betrayed. And then there's also a sense of entitlement and an expectation that you must think the way I do. And if you don't, you're betraying me, or you're evil. There's so much of this now, and there's so much silencing at many levels, in the media, in families, in corporations. You see a lot of people in different corporations really afraid when they go to work every day because there's bullying, they're afraid to speak out. And so this can feel like a sense of betrayal from people and institutions that you've trusted your whole life. And there's been so much change that has happened so quickly that a lot of people don't really know how to process this rapid change over the last 5-10 years that we're seeing in a society that's really twisting and flipping on its head, and so we don't know what to expect. And so this, in turn, creates more alienation and isolation because people are now afraid of each other. I'm 62. I grew up in a different time in the world, in this country. There was a lot of openness and friendliness, and people with different kinds of opinions really mixed together, enjoyed each other, learned from each other, and were great friends. We don't see that quite as much anymore.
What I think I hear you saying is that it's almost as if we've come to identify ourselves with our opinions.
Yes,
And so if we don't share the same opinion about something, then I and you have nothing else. It's personal.
it's
My
like we're a
opinion
different species.
is personal, and so we become instantly differentiated or connected based on what we think about something rather
Yes.
than who we are.
Yes, yes,
That's kind of, that would explain the fragility that you're describing,
Yes.
the insecurity that people feel. What are some common ways those feelings get expressed? And I'm going to add another question, which you can move on to when you want to, but which of these expressions are unhelpful and why?
So and Father Tim touched on some of these earlier when he spoke, but some of the ways that the feelings get expressed are surprise, joy, disgust, withdrawal, and when there are negative feelings that get expressed, there's generally a tremendous amount of judgment. The whole concept of live and let live is evaporating, right? So what I always recommend is to try to be curious rather than critical. And so curiosity is a very healthy response to a situation where you may be caught off guard or don't understand where someone, help me understand this, and to be curious and to ask questions and to try to learn from one another.
As opposed to what would be some unhelpful ways of responding.
An unhelpful way would be, well, he's an asshole, or you're a jerk, or how can you think that? I gotta go.
Yeah.
You know, things like that.
How can you think that? What does that do to the interpersonal reaction? Just that, how can you think that? Which is, I think, probably, I don't know, that runs through my head often. How can someone think that way? How could they say that? What does that do to the relationship?
It breaks whatever bond has been built, and there are 4 components to a secure bond in any relationship: safety, accessibility, responsiveness, and emotional engagement. And that really cuts off the emotional engagement. So it takes so long to build a bond, and a bond can be destroyed in a few seconds.
And yet none of those 4 included agreement.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? So agreement really isn't a basis for safety.
It's
would you
not a
say?
necessity. But safety doesn't mean that the person has to agree with you. Safety means that they're not going to hit you.
Or judge you necessarily.
Yeah, or judge you.
Yeah.
And that's the very fine point that is lost in all of this, because there is so much judgment now. I mean, if you turn on the television, whatever channel you watch, you're getting judgmental opinions from somebody.
And an attack of anyone who doesn't think this way.
Yeah.
Well, what can we do with those feelings in us? Because, to be very honest, you've been describing me at times. So as we experience those feelings, maybe of disgust or distrust, or suddenly feeling betrayed, or feeling like, oh, I'm no longer safe with this person because they think this way, and I know inside myself that I think a different way. So all of a sudden I feel on, if nothing else, on eggshells or on thin ice with that person. What can we do with those feelings in us when they are in danger of taking us in an unhelpful direction?
Change topics
Okay.
is one thing, but also to recognize that we all have authority and agency over ourselves. And one of the fruits of the Spirit is self-control, and to learn how to modulate, recognize, and manage our own emotional responses in an adaptive way that help us to further our own goals rather than to take us away from our own goals. And you have to define what your goals are. But as Christians, I think we share a common goal of wanting to be loving and to accept our fellow man, to be decent people, and to welcome and forgive and things like that.
So what I'm hearing is a bit of self-awareness and self-regulation.
And self-regulation. And, you know, one other thing from Scripture comes to mind, which is the famous, forgive them for they know not what they do, you know.
So practicing forgiveness.
Yeah.
Which is in a way acknowledging that there's a problem here.
And recognizing that I might be wrong. Like what I might think I'm right today, but next year I might change some of my beliefs and I might think, oh boy, I was wrong about that. So having the humility to be teachable, to continually be teachable, to keep an open mind, and to focus on oneself and your own learning and your own growth, instead of focusing on you and what I need to tell you. I need to focus on myself and what do I need to improve in myself, and how am I being called to grow through this situation. So if I'm really disturbed by something, then a good question to ask spiritually is, how is God developing my character through this situation? Because the ultimate process of maturity and growth is character development, right? And we can use our Christian principles to help us to do that, and many other things as well.
And in Christian terms or theological terms, we call that spiritual formation. Is that character development, but it's coming from something deep within that then affects not just who we are here, but who we are in the way we
And some of the
respond to other
greatest
people.
character development comes through our flaws and our mistakes, because when we approach those mistakes with a teachable spirit of humility, then we can actually get the lesson and move on. But if we don't get the lesson, we'll keep getting the lesson, and it'll get louder and louder until we actually get it.
Thank you. And in a way, you've kind of already begun to answer this, but what are some helpful tips for responding to someone who is speaking in a hostile or aggressive manner towards us? So this isn't just the category of someone who has a difference of opinion that they're expressing, but who's actually moved into being aggressive or even hostile in their way of behaving or speaking to us. How do we respond to that?
Well, if you feel that they're violent, get up and leave. If you don't feel that they're going to be violent, you can, and this requires the self-control to sit there and listen to them without saying anything, and just let them go. Let it rip, because at some point they will stop, and you don't really have to respond. I ran a therapy group with someone who he was viciously attacked by one of the group members, and I watched him do that, and it was an extraordinary thing to watch. The person needed to get it out, and then they kind of shut up and moved on. But to watch his self-control was incredible, you know, just to know that that's possible. Another thing you can do is to be curious, you know, to help me understand where this is coming from, what's going on, and to be curious and engage the person who's very hostile. That's another
So someone
approach.
being hostile may be treating you as if you're not human, but to treat them like a person.
Yes, and then the highest level, I would say, is to let them go, and we actually do this as therapists, because people attack their therapists sometimes. Thank you for having the courage to express yourself and be so honest with me. I'm honored by your vulnerability. Thank you for trusting me enough to do that.
What kind of reaction does that get?
They're surprised.
Do they apologize afterwards?
No. But I do think that's the highest level response you can have, is to thank the person for being able to be so honest and for trusting you to show that dark side. I wouldn't call it dark to them, but just to show me your true feelings.
I don't
Thank
know if
you.
I could go that high. I think I could say, you sound pretty angry about this.
Yeah, that's good too.
Which is an honest statement.
And that's validation. And a lot of times people just need validation from somewhere because they don't get it anywhere. Nobody will listen to them. Nobody cares if they're angry. So if you say what you just said, you know, it sounds like you're pretty angry, that helps. That helps.
Well, my last question for you, and then I'll open up to anyone else, but how has being a follower of Jesus influenced the way you handle difficult situations with people? And I don't just mean when you're wearing your therapist hat, because that's a very controlled environment, but taking all that you've learned as a therapist into personal situations. I don't know if you'd be willing to share.
Absolutely. It's been like having a heart transplant. And I got baptized in this church 15 years ago at the age of 47. So I came to Christ later in life, and there is a remarkable difference in the years before and then the years after of a kinder, gentler, more forgiving nature, and a sort of light that is there to transmit to others, but absolutely a stronger and more loving spirit. I think my husband could probably say a few words about how I've changed, but it's been a remarkable and the marriage has completely gone into a different dimension since I became a Christian. I kind of did it myself because I was always seeking spiritually, and we never went to church before. And so for like the first 3 years, I came here by myself, and then he saw me changing and becoming, I think, a sweeter, more loving person. And then he became attracted and also started coming. So it was through attraction, not promotion.
That is a beautiful, beautiful testimony. Thank you. Well, I want to open it up to anyone else who might want to bring questions to Anita or to Father Tim or anything else. Maybe it's just a comment of something that stood out to you from tonight's conversation.
Yeah, or from your discussions as well. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah.